Hi, I'm Joe Huss. I'm a 25-year Naperville resident and a volunteer with Nest. Before we share our perspective on the IMEA extension, we wanted to make sure you knew who Nest was. In 2019, City Council unanimously voted to create the Naperville Environment and Sustainability Task Force, or NEST, to provide advice on environmental and sustainability issues. NEST is a group of Naperville residents who volunteer to improve our environment. We receive no city or industry funding. We partner with the city and other community organizations for events like the Styrofoam Recycling event on April 11th and the DuPage River cleanup on April 18th. As part of that mandate, we provide advice, and today we're sharing our updated cost analysis on the IMA contract and our recommendation on contract renewal. And the sources for all the information in this presentation are available on our website, sustainnaperville.org. For those new to the issue, we copied this from the city's website. IMEA supplies the city with energy and will continue to do that under the current contract, which ends in 2035. Naperville ratepayers pay IMEA over $100 million a year based on their electricity usage. The proposed IMEA extension was estimated by the city's consultants to exceed $2 billion. The question being voted on is whether we'll skip the formal procurement process and sign an extension with IMEA through 2055, or we wait until closer to the end of the IMEA contract and potentially consider other vendors. Nest is recommending that we not extend the contract for three main reasons. First, IMEA has been and continues to be more expensive than the alternatives. Its older technology makes it very likely to continue to be more expensive. Second, we lose flexibility and control for the next 30 years since IMEA is proposing a contract that ends in 2055, and there's no way to exit the contract. Third, we would continue to pay IMEA to burn millions of tons of coal to generate electricity. We'd be responsible for polluting at a much higher rate than the global, state, or U.S. averages. Now we'll provide more details on each of those 3 points. Uh, be- Before I show the cost analysis, I want to share the most recent IMEA bill. You can see that in December we paid about $9.5 million, which was about $85.58 per megawatt hour. And I share that to give you some context about the amount of money we're discussing and what IMEA typically charges. At the city's energy workshop, both Nest and a consulting company hired by the city called CJ Law showed analysis that IMEA had been more expensive than the market. Those two independent analyses used two different benchmarks, both finding IMEA was more expensive. We just updated our analysis to include 2025 costs using the actual IMEA bills. In 2025, Naperville ratepayers paid 43% more for IMEA's electricity than the market rate. IMEA was $88.84 per megawatt hour compared to the market of $62.20. For the market rate, we use PJM's Naperville hub price. PJM is the company that runs the grid in our part of the country. Naperville also pays for part of the bonds used to build IMEA's largest coal plant. In 2025, that debt service accounted for $17.55 per megawatt. So even if we weren't having to pay the bonds for the plant we're using, and even if IMEA didn't issue any new bonds to replace their aging equipment, IMEA's power would still have been 15% more expensive than the market. Given that IMEA has historically been more expensive, is more expensive now, and we don't see a reason that IMEA wouldn't continue to be more expensive in the future, we're recommending that we get bids from other vendors. Normally, you'd bid out a contract unless the incumbent was significantly better than the market. In this case, the incumbent is actually performing worse than the market, so it seems like an obvious decision to explore alternatives and potentially save ratepayers millions of dollars. The bottom line is Naperville residents and businesses spent tens of millions of dollars extra to get IMEA's electricity. To better understand why IMEA is more expensive, I'll share some information from the city. In the last chart, you saw the red bars on the IMEA cost chart increase significantly. This page from the October 30th Naperville City Manager's Memo shows that IMEA's transmission costs are steadily increasing. In fact, IMEA just passed another 12% transmission rate increase on us starting on January 1st, 2026. Since 2019, its transmission charges to members have escalated at an average annual rate of about 12.75%. Compare that to the transmission rate our nearby nearby Illinois neighbors are paying to PJM, that transmission organization, which has increased on average of 2.1% annually over that same time period. IMEA's transmission cost increases are largely driven by IMEA's cost-sharing formula, where we subsidize downstate IMEA members because the transmission rates on their grid, MISO, are more than double those in northern Illinois. Simply put, Naperville ratepayers are seeing annual double-digit increases to fund downstate IMEA members. If we were with another provider, we would just pay for our usage. In addition to the Nest and CJ Law analysis, these two Chicago Tribune articles support and describe some of the reasons IMEA has been more expensive. Cost overruns on building IMEA's largest coal plant contributed to the high debt servicing costs that Naperville residents pay. IMEA's largest plant was over $1 billion over budget. Unfortunately, based on what the IMEA CEO said about their entry into the transmission business, IMEA is asking us to pay for more investments that don't provide good returns and they're not even on the grid that Naperville uses. They're on the grid that most of IMEA members use, which is in southern Illinois. Additionally, IMEA remains neither transparent or a good financial steward. The business case for the transmission lines was never shared with City Council or residents, despite the fact that Naperville will pay an additional $27 million if we stay with IMEA to pay for these new transmission obligations. Like we saw with the billion-dollar cost overruns at Prairie State and with IMEA's entry into a new business for them, a new transmission business, those kinds of decisions are almost certainly going to lead to higher costs for Naperville ratepayers. The clear alternative to our coal problem is renewables. 88% of the capacity added in America this year was renewable energy. Frankly, if you ignore all the information we've shared so far and just follow the money, you'll see that regardless of political party, no new coal plants have been built in the U.S. in well over a decade. While serious investors who conduct detailed scenario analysis are investing billions in renewables because they expect renewables to cost less than older technologies like coal. While IMEA is indefinitely tied to aging coal plants, Naperville is not. We can take advantage of the significant declines in renewable energy costs just as other communities are. When our current contract ends in 10 years, the cost advantage of renewables over IMEA's plan to mine and burn millions of tons of coal for 20 more years will be even greater. In summary, every analysis shows IMEA is more expensive and has been a drain on our local economy. We recommend that the council leverage the free market and find residents lower cost alternatives. In addition to cost being a reason not to renew the contract's risk is another. Here are a couple reasons why risk is a problem with the IMEA contract. First, we've spoken with a few of IMEA's competitors, and none of them lock us in for a fraction of the time that IMEA is proposing. Just as when you select a cell phone service provider, having flexibility lets you switch to another company if that company you're on is no longer the least expensive. And second, IMEA is an agency in Springfield that we can't control if we sign this extension. We don't have the votes to control our destiny like we would with other companies. we have local control with our electricity distribution here in Naperville. Why would we give that up on electricity generation? Finally, pollution is the last major reason not to sign the extension. IMEA's plant creates more pollution than any other in the state. 86% of the electricity IMEA generates is from coal, which is the dirtiest fuel. According to the city's greenhouse gas inventory, with IMEA as our vendor, Naperville is responsible for 3.5 billion pounds of air pollution annually. Unfortunately, IMEA has a presentation on reducing pollution, but the contract does not have any commitments to follow that plan. And there's a feature in IMEA's contract called a member directed resource, or MDR, and that doesn't reduce our greenhouse gas emissions because the contract requires us to take all our electricity from IMEA. Given that we have a climate crisis and carbon dioxide levels are higher than they've ever been in human history, contributing to that problem leaves our children with a rapidly warming planet. With IMEA, we're causing more damage than the average person on the globe, the average American, or the average Illinoisan. In summary, it's been almost exactly 18 years since we signed with IMEA. That contract dramatically increased Naperville's costs and pollution. It's time we explore some of the dozens of other options available to us because we can do better. We can do better because giving up control and flexibility for 30 years will drive up costs in the long run. And we can do better because the pollution levels aren't aligned with Naperville's values. But given that all the analysis show residents and businesses are paying millions more for IMEA's electricity, we advocate that City Council vote for a transparent, competitive bidding process and rate relief for residents. Thank you.